Hi, everyone. My name is Chris Fox, and today I will be introducing to you Edouard Lalo and his Cello Concerto in D minor. Composer Edouard Lalo rose out of obscurity in 19th century France and became known for lively, innovative musical compositions, which often incorporated Spanish rhythms and folk songs. Although he fell from prominence following his death in the late 1800s, Lalo's music, including his Cello Concerto in D minor, is today experiencing a well-deserved resurgence. Edouard Lalo was born in 1823 in the city of Lille, the northernmost part of France. Although French by birth, Lalo's family was Spanish by ancestry and lived according to Spanish family traditions, including preferences for Spanish food, women, and music. Lalo's Spanish heritage explains why much of his music incorporates a distinctly Spanish sound. Lalo was raised in a wealthy household and, as a child, his parents encouraged him in the study of music. He proved to be a gifted musician and was enrolled in the Lille Conservatoire. Unlike many composers of his day, Lalo began his studies on violin and cello, not piano. His time at the Lille Conservatoire gave him much of the knowledge he needed to become a successful composer. By the time he was 16, Lalo had devoted himself to music and wanted to make it his career. Unfortunately, he was met with fierce opposition from his father, Edouard Lalo. As a decorated military officer in the Grand Army, Edouard wanted his son to follow in his footsteps by joining the military. In addition, he wanted to maintain the family's genteel reputation. It was considered shameful for the son of a bourgeoisie family to become an artist. Edouard refused to give in to his father's demands, so the young composer left home for Paris and did not see his father again for another 16 years when Edouard was on his deathbed. Destitute and only 16 years old when he arrived in Paris, Lalo was forced to make a living entirely on his own. He worked as a string musician and teacher, but struggled to support himself. Aside from his enrollment in the Paris Conservatoire, this period in Lalo's life is quite obscure, and there is limited information on his activities. It is known that during the 1840s, when he was in his 20s, Lalo began composing music for small ensembles. He wrote various violin, piano, and cello sonatas, in addition to a string quartet. These works received little attention. Public opinion in 1840s France held that chamber music was unfashionable and that all of the best music had already been written. This made it difficult for composers like Lalo to make a name for themselves. Lalo refused to give up his passion for chamber music, however. In 1855, he founded the Armengad Quartet, in which he played viola. The quartet played a significant role in the revival of French chamber music, performing works by Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, and Lalo himself. This group gained considerable popularity and helped restore public interest in the genre. Lalo appears to have completely given up composing between 1855 and 1865, a 10-year hiatus. The French public was simply not interested in hearing new music. This began to change in 1865, however, when Napoleon II called for an opera and dramatic music contest. Lalo wrote the opera La Fisque for the competition. He failed to win first place and received only mixed reviews, but this composition brought Lalo out of his composing slump. That same year, he began composing music for his new wife and former pupil, the beautiful contralto Julie Meligny. It was only in the 1870s, when Lalo was around 50 years old, that he began to enjoy considerable fame. He began composing concertos for famous musicians of the day, including Pablo de Sarasate. It was for this famed Spanish violinist that Lalo wrote his most popular work, the Symphony Espagnole. Other notable works include Le Roi Dix, Danza Espanola, and his Cello Concerto in D minor, the main topic of this paper. Lalo's music is known for its unique sound, and many critics find it refreshingly innovative. He uses bold, powerful melodies that are expressive and colorful. His orchestration is noisy, yet full of character and rhythmic diversity. He drew from Scandinavian, Russian, and especially Spanish folk tunes in his music. Nevertheless, Lalo struggled to ever fit in with his musical peers. Some accused Lalo of being too Wagnerian, a common, although questionable, insult aimed at many French composers of the day. Lalo considered this comparison a serious insult given France's anti-German sentiments following the Franco-Prussian War. If it had not been for the era and country in which Lalo was born, he may have gained more appreciation as an artist during his time. Lalo is still unknown to many today, but his music has seen a modest revival. Among cellists, his concerto in D minor has become standard repertoire and is performed frequently. It was originally composed for Belgian cellist Adolf Fischer in the autumn of 1877 and premiered later that year. There were only a few other contemporary cello concertos at the time because composers doubted the instrument's solo capabilities. However, Lalo's concerto demonstrated that the cello was as worthy of orchestral accompaniment as violin or piano. The concerto follows the standard three-part structure, opening with a fast movement, followed by a slow lyrical movement, and concluding with another fast movement. It exhibits many of the unique stylistic choices discussed above for which Lalo was known. The concerto can best be characterized by its intensity. From the opening bars to the final cadence, there exists a lively energy that takes full advantage of the cello's range and tone. The soloist is constantly in the foreground, and it successfully balances urgent, heavy passages with lyrical, slow ones. In addition, its noticeable Spanish characteristics set it apart from other concertos in the cello repertoire. The first movement structure can be described as using the traditional masculine-feminine-masculine sonata form of the 19th century. It opens with a slow orchestral introduction of loud staccato chords. The cello enters shortly afterward with a lyrical passage marked ad lib. The soloist will often take rhythmic freedom in this section, anticipating the introduction of the main theme. At the Allegro Maestoso, the cello introduces the primary masculine theme, which is characterized by its rising D minor arpeggio. This extroverted commanding section gives way to the feminine theme, which is marked dolcissimo espressivo. This masculine theme returns at the end of the movement after a particularly long development section. This movement alone is around 15 minutes long because all of its melodic lines are repeated multiple times. Some cellists will actually cut out parts that they feel are too repetitive. The second movement opens with a lento section that shows the expressive qualities of the cello. This leads into a scherzo section, a technique that Brahms and Tchaikovsky were known to use in their second movements. The movement structure strongly resembles a Spanish pavana, which is a slow, stately dance often accompanied by a fast dance. This is one example of how Lalo implemented his Spanish background into his music. The melodic figure of the fast section reveals a Spanish influence as well. It is almost entirely stepwise, which was a common trait of Sevillana music. In addition, its lively tempo, rhythmic patterns, and frequent note repetitions make it sound like a cante flamenco. Lalo's concerto shows his mastery at blending different aspects of Spanish music and dance into his works. The third and final movement features even more Spanish influences. The opening is extremely similar to a cita, which is a traditional form of Hispanic song. This type of singing is forceful and sounds like improvisation. It also features a bass line that sounds at least an octave below the soloist, a melody that shifts suddenly between forte and piano, and a closing statement in a soprano register. The prelude of Lalo's third movement fits all of these criteria. Afterward, the Allegro vivace section includes a fast-paced habanera, yet another form of Spanish dance. Spanish violinist Pablo de Sarasate would later use this theme in his own habanero for violin. Although Lalo's Cello Concerto has become popular in recent decades, it has a past of mixed reviews. Lalo's own publisher was not impressed by the piece and was unhappy with the critics' impressions. The Monthly Musical Record wrote about the 1877 premiere, saying that the concerto was agreeable but somewhat pretentious. In a later performance, Jean Garady called the piece delicate and cleverly written, yet diffuse and uninteresting. In 1946, Gramophone called the concerto dull and lacking in sufficient tonal contrast. In addition, it said the finale made the cello sound uncouthly elephantine. Fortunately, the concerto has survived these mixed reviews and is now recognized as a superb cello piece worthy of study by most student and professional cellists. Indeed, the D minor concerto has been professionally recorded by nearly every famous concert cellist in the last century. Unfortunately, the full autograph score has been lost, but this has given cellists the freedom to publish their own editions and interpret the piece as they choose. Nonetheless, there exists a piano reduction of the score where Lalo continued to edit the cello part, which is likely the most accurate edition available today. Edouard Lalo is one of the more obscure composers of the 19th century. His lack of family support, interest in chamber music, and critical French environment made it difficult for him to thrive. Today, his music is rightfully seeing a revival and will likely become more prevalent in concert programs in the coming decades. While he is still most known for his Symphony Espagnole, Lalo's Cello Concerto was instrumental to his short-lived fame and has become recognized as one of his greatest compositions. Thank you for listening, and I hope you learned a little something.